It is our last panel session, which is entitled How Terrorism Ends. Since the conference is nearly at an end, I thought that we put this session at the very end of the conference. And we have four fantastic panelists. Unfortunately, Norman Benotman, former leader of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Force, couldn't get into the country. And he is indeed a former militant, but the importance here is former. And some of the visa authorities have not realized yet that he has completely abandoned his previous beliefs. So I won't be able to present you Norman Benotman, but I have nevertheless four excellent guests who will talk very competently about this issue. First, I would like to introduce Professor Audrey Kurth-Cronin, who has recently published a book from which we have shamelessly plagiarized the topic for the session. It is called How Terrorism Ends, and I want to start the session by asking Audrey, how does terrorism end?
That's the first time I've ever been asked that. Well, the subtitle on my book is Understanding the Decline and Demise of Terrorist Campaigns. So the obvious answer to the question, how does terrorism end, is that terrorism as a phenomenon obviously doesn't end. But individual groups that use terrorism, by which I mean attacks on innocents, particularly women and children, non-combatants, individual groups that use terrorism do invariably come to an end. And so the book is about 6 different kinds of endings, patterns of endings, themes that predominate in many groups. And it looks comparatively at about 500 different groups throughout the last couple of centuries, and sees a certain 6 different kinds of ways that they tend to meet their demise. The first is through some sort of capturing or killing of the leader, which is decapitation. Not very often successful by itself. Obviously, there are a lot of caveats about the conditions under which it works, depending upon the nature of a group, the age of the group, the kind of leadership, the degree to which there's a cult of personality. Decapitation being the ending of a group, I would argue historically is the exception very much rather than the rule, but it has occasionally worked. Secondly is negotiations. Negotiations succeed under certain conditions that you can sort of see through the sweep of the various different groups that we've studied. There are promising conditions, such things as the existence of strong leaders. Lord Trimble was talking about earlier today. I found that to be consistent across many different groups. The existence of a third-party factor, a sponsor, particularly an outside objective sponsor, is often very important to the success of negotiations. A political stalemate, not strictly a military stalemate in the sense that this is highly asymmetrical kind of violence. So therefore, the political context is extraordinarily important. And then the question of whether the cause for which a group arose is on the ascendancy or not, the sort of broader historical context, is absolutely crucial to whether or not negotiations succeed. In any case, and then there are some conditions under which negotiations are very unpromising, and those include, very, very briefly, the existence of suicide attacks, the existence of spoilers who are working against negotiations, and the splintering of individual groups. A third pattern is success. Occasionally, groups actually do succeed. Again, this is one of the least common endings, but there are a couple of cases in my book. And then the fourth pattern is failure. Failure either because a group loses its popular support, or because there is a kind of dynamic of implosion within the group. And there are actually many, many examples historically of implosion. In particular, if you look over sort of the broad sweep of all the groups that I looked at, one of the most common endings is that a group simply loses the ability to continue on a cause. It's actually very difficult to be a terrorist. You might be glad to know. It's not a very promising vocation. And then the last 2 general patterns include repression by a state. I did find a couple of cases where states were willing to simply engage in a kind of scorched earth policy, and if you're willing to kill everyone and everything, occasionally repression has historically worked. And then the last one is reorientation. to a different kind of behavior. Not necessarily the ending of violence, but that reorientation can be toward criminality or toward more traditional kinds of violence like insurgency or even conventional war. So in any case, those are the 6 patterns. Sorry to go on for so long. You'll see that some groups show more than one kind of pattern, but the good news is that groups always do end.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Audrey. I think that we're taking it now from 30,000 feet to one particular individual. Not you, Hekmat. But I want to turn next to Shiraz, who, I'm glad to say, has never been a terrorist, but who has known terrorists and who was involved in an extremist group and who was, in fact, a senior representative of that group. And the question that you're always being asked, but I always find it interesting to hear you answer, is why did you become involved and what made you leave?
I suppose to answer the question in broad brushstrokes, the process of getting involved was straight after September the 11th, and it seems quite counterintuitive to many people that someone who was not religious, who was in no way observant as a Muslim, would suddenly, after September the 11th, want to get involved with an extremist group. But very much I found that groups, particularly radical Islamist groups, grew in the immediate aftermath of September the 11th. And I think there are a whole host of reasons for that. But if you were sort of attracted to that radical politics, to that desire, as it were, at that time to create a new world, then you had a pretty dramatic advertisement from the terrorist network out there that seemed to suggest certainly that they were capable and possibly on the cusp of creating a new history. And there was a desire to be very much a part of that. And of course, it's sort of laced with all the ideas that this is your religious obligation and that this is the path to salvation for eternity. And so it suddenly becomes a very, not just pressing issue, but obviously a vital issue and a crucial one.
But how did it happen in your particular case, Shiraz?
So with me, I went to the mosque to speak to people, really just to find out what Muslims were thinking of September the 11th. And I met representatives from the group I ended up joining, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and they present themselves as a political organization, ostensibly non-violent, and it seemed very interesting. They had this well thought out, seemingly idea that sort of was a panacea to all the world's problems. It was revolutionary. It was a total and comprehensive solution to pretty much every problem that you could throw up. I remember, in fact, when I was involved, my cell leader saying, there's no problem that we can't link back to the absence of the caliphate. And you could just take everything back to that. And so, and that's what we would do. And so we believed that by creating the Islamic State, we would overcome all these problems and liberate the world, including non-Muslims. And then very much the sort of process of sort of getting out of that and leaving was, really, I was in the north of England. I was living up there. I was running the group in that area. So every day I was spending time with the organization. All my friends were in the organization. And there was very little time to reflect, I suppose, critically. And then I moved. And I moved to a part of the country where there really weren't other members. And that gave me space, intellectual space and physical space to reassess what I was looking at, what I was propagating. And I began to sort of read more widely and read around what I believed in.